with the professional.
How y'all doing? Mr. President, it's good to be with you. Thank you all very much. Please take a seat. Thank you. It's great to be back. You guys have had to hear me so many times over the last 35 years. None of you are old enough, but 35 years that I just tell you it's nice speaking to an audience where we are not only with whom you agree, but you feel totally comfortable with a whole lot of folks out there that I grew up with. By the way, where's Delaware? There you are. Well, stand up, man. We're small, but we're proud. I'm going to see you guys in a minute. As the Delaware guys can tell you, when I ran as a 29-year-old kid, Harold, it was a tough race, and somebody, I made a statement that became sort of lore in Delaware. And as the campaign was coming in, I said, look, there are three parties in Delaware: Democrats, Republicans, and firefighters. And I've got the firefighters. That's why I'm going to win. And in Delaware, I did. They've been my best allies my whole career. I owe them. And as some of you know, I owe them so much more than my career. I owe them the life of my two boys, and I owe them a lot more. Folks, acclamation? You got reelected by acclamation? Nothing in my life has ever happened by acclamation. Nothing. As a matter of fact, I had to ask my wife 5 times to marry me before she said yes. So I don't know about this acclamation stuff, both of you. As my mother would say, God love you. Obviously, they love you. And I do too, because I want to tell you, I got to catch Harold's introduction, which was overly generous, as I stood behind the curtain here, and we've been doing this together for a long time, a long, long time. And I think we've made a lot of progress, but all that's sort of in jeopardy right now. We're facing some real serious headwinds. You heard me say it before, in smaller crowds, meeting with some of you individually. You're caught in a perfect storm. First, this recession. The recession we inherited has just broken the budgets and the backs of so many towns and municipalities, putting their mayors in god-awful positions, making Hobbes's choices, and putting you in an even worse position. A lot of your guys and women have been on the chopping block. The second piece of that perfect storm is a Republican Congress elected in 2010, overwhelmingly bent on obstruction, obstructing our efforts to help you, to protect your jobs, and keep enough people on the force to be able to protect your lives. Because what most people don't know out there is your lives are more in jeopardy, literally in jeopardy, when you respond without a full complement of firefighters. For starters, almost to a person, every one of those members in that Congress, Republican Congress, voted against the Recovery Act. In the Senate, all but 3 voted against the Recovery Act when we got in. Recovery Act, which allowed fire departments to rehire, to avoid layoffs, keeping more than 1,200 firefighters on the job, helping 120 fire departments modernize, build new fire stations, and in the process, creating jobs for others. They voted against it, but we prevailed. And then along in 2011, in the midst of the local budget crunches you all are dealing with every day, Republicans in the Congress voted to zero out the SAFER grants, just eliminate it in the name of budget restraint. They went on and rejected our proposal for $1 billion in immediate funding to help fire departments rehire folks they had to lay off, prevent more layoffs, make sure, as I said, you have the crew size you need. Folks, your job's not getting easier. There are not fewer fires. There's not fewer crises. There's not fewer accidents. It's not like there's any rationale to argue you can do as much as you did before with smaller crews. And then in 2014, for the 2014 budget, they've now proposed a $125 million cut. They lost the fight on eliminating SAFER grants. Now they want to cut $125 million out of SAFER grants. Translate it to my community back home, to the communities you all live in, that's 400 fewer firefighters. 400 fewer of you ready to save our property, our lives. 400 more layoffs. The third part of this perfect storm is they, along with some Republican governors, saw this as a great opportunity to do what they've always wanted to do. A great opportunity to go at your very right to bargain, not only for your pay and your benefits, but for what you needed to protect your community. They've attempted, these governors, not all, but most Republican governors, to lay the blame for this recession on you, on public sector workers. If you listen to the rhetoric, somehow you guys are the ones that came up with these wacky financial instruments on Wall Street. You guys are the ones responsible for city budgets, state budgets, being so drastically affected by this recession we inherited. Republican governors went after your ability to collect dues in the states of Florida and Arizona. They went after your collective bargaining rights in Ohio, New Hampshire, Florida. Tried to take away your ability to have a say on what type of gear you needed and the hours that you can safely work without jeopardizing your partner, you, and the effort. So let's take a look at what all this adds up to, this perfect storm. Why did they take these positions? I really genuinely act this is not your father's Republican Party. This is a different breed of cat. We didn't used to have these fights. We had Republicans when I was in the Senate and the House who were supportive, who understood the value you provide to each of your communities. But the thing that's changed, as I've tried to figure it out, is I think this new Republican Party looks at you as both the reason for and the solution to this god-awful recession we inherited. We inherited, by the way, because of their policies. The same policies they're continuing to push. They look at your ranks and they see an easy place to cut budgets to accommodate their priorities. Not just you, cops, public workers generally. Don't take my word for it. Just listen to what Governor Romney, who, by the way, is a good family man, a guy who means well. I think part of the problem is I don't think he just gets you. I don't think he really understands. I mean this sincerely. I don't think he understands what you're all about, what makes you tick, what makes you decide to go into this profession that you couldn't pay enough to 90% of the population, including me, to do what you do every day. He said, I quote, guaranteeing the government will keep its fire, police, and teachers intact is not an effective way to get the economy rolling again. Tell that to the store owner who without you may lose everything they own. Tell that to the family whose house is now underwater and is burning down, and the ability for them to be able to get back on their feet will be drastically altered because you're not around. Tell that to the family whose child or mother or father, whose hand you're holding as that ambulance races through the street to try to get him in an emergency room. He went on to say, it's time to cut back on teachers, firefighters, and policemen. Not in my neighborhood, not in other people's neighborhoods. What happens when we cut back on fire and police? Our vulnerability, our exposure, ordinary citizens, it goes up exponentially. He further said, referring to Governor Romney, my own view is that right to work is the right way to go, and I'd like to see it on a national level as well. Did you think we'd be fighting these fights again in 2012? No. Ladies and gentlemen, maybe you knew him better than I did. But I didn't think I'd be standing before you all here after all the times I've had the honor of appearing before you and talking about whether we had to fight for the right to work for less under the right to work philosophy that for so long had dominated. Folks, as I said, this is not your father's Republican Party. These guys have a fundamentally different philosophy. Again, they're not bad guys. They just have a fundamentally different view. They have a different value set than we do. As my dad would say, a different set of priorities. They act like you're the community's problem, as if you're not part of the community, as if somehow you come from some other place, as if you haven't been as affected by this recession as your neighbors have, not because you're a firefighter, because you're a middle-class citizen trying to make it work. How many of you have had a spouse lose their job or get their hours cut? How many of you, because of this recession, have had to step in and help elderly parents meet their basic needs? How many of you with kids in college, how many of you have had that conversation at the kitchen table with your wife or your husband and saying, honey, who's going to tell her? Who's going to tell her I don't think we can send her back to the state university this year? I don't think we can make it. How many of you had to consider what you do about your home? How many of you have gone to bed at night staring at the ceiling, wondering whether you're going to be in that same house a month from now, 3 months from now, 5 months from now? How many of you have picked up that phone and called the outfit that has your mortgage and said, I've never missed a mortgage payment, but I'm paying at 6.5% or 7 or 7.5%. I know people are refinancing their mortgages at 4% or thereabouts. Let me refinance my home. It will save me several $1,000s a year. It'll mean I can pay for the automobile insurance I'm having trouble figuring out how to pay. It'll mean I'm going to be able to do A, B, and C. You see, where we come from, $3,000 a year makes a big difference. It matters. But how many of you had that conversation just to hear a hollow voice on the other end of the phone? How many of you guys and women had to tell your kids, no, I'm sorry, honey, no camp, no vacation this year. It's not the end of the world. And how many of you? You live in the neighborhood you protect. You are the community. You and your brothers and sisters in law enforcement make it possible for people to live a basic middle-class life. You live in the neighborhood of those whose property and lives you swore to protect and help and save. Ask these guys who have a different view than us. When someone's trapped in a second-story burning building, who's the guy that runs in, or the woman that runs in? It's your neighbor. It's you. When there's a car accident, and the husband makes that frantic 911 call and says, my wife is trapped. She's trapped in the vehicle. I can't get her out. Who do they send? Who shows up like you did for my family with the jaws of life and pulls her out? Who drives the ambulance and holds her hand and reassures her all the way back, it's going to be okay. We're going to get you there. When it's hot and dry, like it is in the West, and literally lightning strikes, or someone tosses a cigarette from a car, who throws their bodies literally, physically, between the fire and people's homes and businesses, protecting their livestock, their ranches? It's not easy strapping on that gear when it's 98 degrees before you even walk into that inferno to establish a fire line. Folks, I could go on. I think part of the problem is you guys, and I don't know how many funerals I've been to, I don't know how many events I've attended with you. Part of the problem is, ironically, is by your nature, you all don't talk about what you do. You don't think of it in heroic terms. You just say, how many times have I heard you guys, particularly in my home state, say, well, just doing my job. It's my job. Like you showed up to, you know, go to the copy machine. It's just my job. The vast majority of Americans, as I said, including me, you couldn't pay enough to walk into the infernos you walk into. The way you risk your lives in the line of duty, where so many of your colleagues have given their lives. This is sort of my second city. I live 23 miles from here, and if I didn't have to go back, I'd like to invite you all for a drink back home. But right here in Philadelphia, just a few months ago, 2 of your brothers gave their lives fighting a 5-alarm warehouse fire. With a firefighter who died in Chicago just before Christmas, and the roof of the building collapsed. He told his daughter, quote, never think of me as a hero, I'm just doing my job. Well, that's not what I told his family when I spoke to them. He's a hero. All you guys who strap that gear on and walk into God-forsaken circumstances, I know it's your job, but they're heroes. It's hard for me to make those calls. It's hard for you to make those calls. It's hard for their brothers and sisters to see them go down. And work like hell to make sure you never leave them behind. The sound of bagpipes still ring in your ears. The vivid memories of every one of you in this room have. I used to like the sound of bagpipes until I grew up. I don't like them because all the memories. I don't think this other team understands you guys. You're not in this just to fight for your jobs. You're in this fight because you care about the family next door. Because you care about your city, you care about your town, you care about your community. You see what happens when it takes 20 minutes instead of 10 to respond, to get to the scene of an accident or a fire. It's your community. You're not responding somewhere else. That's who you guys are. But that guys I just don't think understand. Because if they did, why wouldn't they be doing all they could in this time of extreme budget crunch, which is legitimate, real crunch? Everybody has to do something. Everybody has to make some sacrifice. But it seems the only guys they ask are middle-class guys and the elderly. By the way, I come from Delaware. On a per capita basis, I think it is still the wealthiest state in the nation. I'm not playing this card about wealthy people are bad. In my state, I learned one thing. Wealthy people are just as patriotic as poor folks. They're just as decent as any middle-class folk I know. The difference here is no one's asked them to do anything. You know, when we separated out in the jobs bill that provision that said we were going to put thousands of firefighters and law enforcement folks back to work, you know how we're going to pay for it? 0.5%, a 0.5% increase in the tax on the first dollar you made after your first million. Let me say that again. 0.5% additional tax on the first dollar you made after your first million. The polling data at the time suggested even people who were self-identified millionaires supported it. These guys, almost to a person, said no. This is about shared responsibility. You know as well as we do. The country is out of this recession, but barely and struggling to move forward. How many of you have literal brothers, blood sisters, because of this recession out of work? Not firefighters, just out of work, through no fault of their own. As I said, I don't think it's because this new Republican Party doesn't care. I think it's because they have a very different value set than we do. As I said, this is not your father's Republican Party. They really, really believe that they have to cut you and millions of other middle-class Americans in order to rebuild this economy. Because they believe at its core, they believe that the way to rebuild the economy of this great nation is from the top down. It's like religion with them. They actually believe it. The reason they have to make all the cuts, in fact, you all as well, are refusing to support us trying to support you, is they have to make room for more benefits and more opportunities for the very wealthy. They say, Biden, don't start this wealthy, not wealthy game. It's a reality. They say they got to make room so it doesn't further balloon the deficit for the Bush tax cuts, for the very wealthy. It's cost $1 trillion over 10 years. $800 billion of it goes to people with a minimum income of $1 million. $800 billion. The statistics are being updated. The last time it was updated in 2010, roughly $500 billion of that went to 120,000 families total. They're redoing the number now to make sure that circumstances change, but not going to change a lot. What could we do for middle-class folks with $500 billion over this time? Is that your priority? Forget firefighters. Forget your job for a minute. Just think of your neighborhood. What do you think? Those 120 families, 120,000 families, households, well, what are they going to do? They're good people. But I don't think it's going to make much of a difference in Claymont or Wilmington or Scranton. Look, folks, we know the way to grow this economy. To coin an old phrase, it's the old-fashioned way. From the middle out. From the middle class out. The reason I say that is, when the middle class does well, everybody does well. When the middle class does well, the poor have a shot up. They have a ladder. They have a way out. And the wealthy, and God bless them. Don't you all wish all your kids? I wish my kids were become wealthy. Nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing. But the wealthy do very well. Why? Because you have money in your pocket to go buy things, to meet your family's needs. Look, we should be cutting your taxes and helping the cities and states maintain their fire service instead of cutting your jobs. We just have a different value set. My dad used to have a saying. The guys in Delaware heard me say this 1,000 times. But it was one of his sayings. He said, Joey, from the time I was a kid, swear to God, Joey, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about your self-respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about how you define yourself. You guys are firefighters. And you're proud. Every time someone would, at the dinner table, say, well, you know, Joe, what I value is to my dad. He'd look and say, jokingly, don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value. Don't tell me how much you admire firefighters. Don't tell me how much you care about the elderly. Don't tell me how much you care about education. Show me your budget. I will tell you what you value. So let's take a look at their budget. Not only does it cut critical investments for firefighters and law enforcement, it eviscerates the working poor and the middle class. And by the way, I'm not making this up. They all signed on to this Ryan budget. The Ryan budget, if it were to pass, become law, if Romney were president, 19 million people would lose Medicaid. A lot of people forced onto it because they've lost everything through no fault of their own. $4.9 billion we cut out of elementary and secondary education. 200,000 kids will lose a chance for early education through Head Start, closing that achievement gap. They voucherized Medicare. Last year they released a plan that would cost seniors to stay in Medicare to have the equivalent $6,400 more out of pocket. How many of you know anybody on Medicare in your neighborhoods or your families has another $6,400 to keep the medical benefits they have now? Well, why do they do all this? Well, they're pretty straightforward about it. To do this, we have to make way for a $1.6 trillion tax cut. I've already talked to you about the $800 billion for the Bush tax cuts. But on top of that, they add another $1 trillion for people whose incomes are a minimum of $1 million. Look, folks, there's a lot at stake here. It's your jobs, and it's also even more than your jobs. It's the jobs of your brothers, literally your brothers. Not your fraternal brothers in the fire service, your brothers, your sisters, your kids, your parents. As I said earlier, your job, doing your job, helps make a middle-class life possible. It helps make the thing, what is the middle class? Middle class is not a number. I love these guys. The economists will talk about a number. Let's say it's at $50,212 or $40. The middle class is a way of life. The middle class is about being able to own your home and not just rent it. Or being able to send your kid to a park you know is safe. It's about being able to send your kid to a school where you know they're going to get enough attention, and if they work hard at it, they'll qualify to be able to go on to school after high school. And that you just may be able to pay for them to get to whatever that is after high school. Because you guys know that 60% of all the jobs in the next decade are going to require some certificate or degree after high school just to get the job. It's about being able to help your parents, some of whom are struggling because they lost their pensions, because they never had one, because they busted their neck to raise you and they expended everything they had. It's about being able to maybe save a little bit of money for yourselves for retirement so you won't have to rely on your kids. It's about being able to be safe in your neighborhood because you know there's someone there to protect you from fire, from injury. Doing your job is about making a middle-class life possible. You folks are special. You really are. You're just special. You're like so many guys and women that I grew up with. I think if they understood you better, they understood how much you are the community and not the problem, we'd be a lot further along. You're the same guys who, when you take off your equipment, your helmet, your uniform, your gear, after responding to an alarm, you jump in your car and you head to the Little League field because you promised you'd line the Little League field. You're the same guys and women who take the trucks out of the fire hall, set up the tables for a potluck dinner to raise money for the person whose house you couldn't save and lost all their clothing. You're the same people who show up at your church for the bake sale because part of the roof collapsed in a snowstorm. You're the guys who stand in the corner at every American scene with those red boots after you've already done your shift collecting money to help your neighbors. Not a whole lot of guys like me in nice suits and ties stand in the corner in the heat after we do our job. Oh, there's a lot of people who are very wealthy who contribute significantly to charity. But you guys do it. You don't only have courage and stamina, you have hearts bigger than your heads. I think you represent the heart, the soul, the very sinew of the cities, the towns, the counties that you protect. You sacrificed. You are professionals. A lot of you were raised in households like mine. You understand as well as any group of Americans that, as I said, the job's about a lot more than a paycheck. Let me tell you what Barack and I are about. We're about restoring the dignity to those folks who, through no fault of their own, have it stripped from them because they've lost their job. All those folks who've lived in a neighborhood where they busted their neck to buy that house because of the silly instruments Wall Street came up with before we got elected, subprime mortgages and these other financial instruments. Two guys or two families up the street, they found their house was repossessed, sold. Without you doing a single thing, all of a sudden you found your house was worth a heck of a lot less than it was the day before. You didn't do anything. But now, instead of having equity in your home you could plan on to be able to send your kid to school, or maybe have a little bit in retirement you're figuring you paid off, all of a sudden you owe more in your home than it's worth. These are the people. You are the people who've made us what we are. You are the people who have put us in a position to be able to lead the world. And again, we're convinced we make you strong again. We give you the opportunity to make it. You've never, ever, ever let the country down. The middle class American folks have never let the country down. And folks, when it comes to firefighters, the American public's reminded every once in a while, nationally, of just what you do. The whole nation saw it in Aurora, Colorado last week. 58 people were wounded, some severely wounded, some still struggling for their lives. But they're alive, those 58 people, because of you. You arrived on the scene in a timely way. You got them the immediate help from stopping the bleeding, to resuscitating them, or whatever. You got them in the ambulance. Some of your colleagues in the police department just put them in their cars. And you got them to the hospital. And Friday morning, you were on the scene at the shooter's apartment. You were there. You were prepared to respond because you were told it was booby-trapped. You didn't know whether the whole complex would blow, whether people in the area would go. But you were there, ready to do whatever was needed if the worst happened. Look, I think I know you guys. So I said, I know what you're thinking. Well, that's just our job. With all of us, your job is a lot more than just a job. The people whose lives you helped save, for all the people you've intervened to change their life, including my own, we owe you. And every once in a while, it's worthy and worth it just to remind people. It's not they don't care, because they just don't fully understand. So folks, I'm absolutely confident. I'm absolutely confident that this will turn around. I'm absolutely confident that we will lead the world in the 21st century as the world's leading economy. The only question I have is, when are they going to get out of the way and let us do more of what we can do right now. And one of the things we could do right now is keep you on the job for our own safety's sake. God, pray God keeps you all safe. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, guys, and thank you.